Greetings, everyone. My name is Kate Greenwald, and I am the Vice President of Sales and fourth generation family member here at Scout Textiles. I'm here to introduce my friend and talented textile designer, Victoria Larson. 3 years ago, when our company sought to collaborate with an established textile designer, Victoria's sense of pattern, context, and design made her a clear fit. Her designs embody gracious living and the joys of simple pleasures. She will be taking us through to the design process of her new heritage collection of fabric and wallpaper, which can be found at the Ernest Gaspard showroom in Ada. During the presentation, please feel free to submit questions for Victoria in the Q&A section so she can address them throughout the presentation. Now live from her Annapolis studio, I would like to introduce the artist behind the collection, Victoria Larson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Welcome to my studio. I'd like to thank Ernest Gaspard and ADAC for hosting this. And I'd also really like to thank Stout. We are in our second year of our collaboration. And I think we work really well together because we share a lot of the same values. Stout is a family-owned company. They've got a ton of history behind them. And they agreed to print this collection in the US, which is really important to me. So let's talk about the new collection. So the second collection, Stout approached me and said, we're not going to give you a design brief this time. Just create something and get back to us and have fun, which is the greatest compliment I think a designer can get. It's also terrifying because there's really no given starting point. So I did what I normally do and went back to my travel sketchbooks and started digging through to look for ideas. I knew I wanted something botanical because botanicals I feel like are really, coming back. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been to New Zealand or Australia, they have the most amazing birds and plants and animals that you have ever seen. So inspiring. So the anchor of the collection, which is Onlooker, is one of my favorites. It's this little bird who's called a fantail, and you can see he's got this awesome shape in the tail. They're really social little birds. They're kind of cheeky. They're all over the parks in New Zealand. And then this kind of wild plant to contrast the bird a little bit was taken from a fringe flower, which is a really beautiful plant, kind of tassely and wild. So I started there. I know it's hard to see here. I started some sketches of the birds to kind of see how they might work together. Did some watercolors and started to put together what the fringe plant might look like. And then started to add a stem so that the collection, the design had a vertical element and really came together there. And part of the process for me is I do like to draw things by hand first. It helps me think and it's easy to manipulate. I started overlaying some colors to see how things might look and to get a better sense of how the repeat was going to work together. Then the real work starts. Then it does go into the computer. And as you can see here, this is now in continuous repeat. It's got the actual colors plugged into it. It's ready for the mill. And then Stout and I review all of these, pick the final colors, and it goes off to be printed. But speaking of color, color on a printed paper looks very flat, and this is going to be printed on fabric. So I actually like to mix up the colors and paint them on the fabric that that we're actually going to use, because I think it gives a much better look at the depth of color. So we have these little samples, and then This is part of what gets cut off and sent to the mill, and that is how they match the color. My next favorite fabric in this collection is Glimmer. And as you probably already know, we also have wallpaper this time in the collection, which is really exciting, the extra layer that you can add in. So Glimmer actually started as this little element here. So this is something that's all over my sketchbooks. It's always on my mood boards. It's the Maori symbol of endurance. And, you know, if you're in this business, you need endurance. Everybody needs a little bit more right now. And so this is a symbol that I carry around since my time in New Zealand. You'll see it in a lot of other cultures as well. Sometimes it's more like a tree of life, but it's a really great little symbol. And you can see in the final pattern, I started to soften it a little bit and then added in a hand-painted dot around the edge to refer back to the fringe plant in the other fabric. So they really do work together very well. And what I love about this design is if you get your hands on samples, you'll see it still has the painted details. It really feels like the original. So you'll see some of the ink kind of come through the other color and really get the sense that it's hand painted. And the fabric is, you know, it's so easy to layer with the rest of the collection. So I took the same little element and put it into this little quadrifoil so I could get a 3-color out of it. And originally, these were kind of 2 options. And we did Glimmer at a big scale, Gentle at a medium scale, and we liked them both so much, so they both made it in the collection. And I love that they work really well together. You know, one of the things that I always like to do with a collection is make sure that there are different scales and that everything in the collection works together so that you can layer, you can mix and match, you can bring in different elements together. And I think that's really successful in this collection. And as Kate said at the beginning, this was originally supposed to be a conversation. So I hope you all came with your questions. Please use that.
Victoria, I did get a good question from John. He's asking, is the design for wallpaper and the fabric the same, or is there any difference in the way that you need to scale things, that you need the way that you need to prep your files?
Great question. So the design, if you look at the actual wallpaper and fabrics together, they do coordinate. The scale, because of the way they're produced, may be just slightly off, but you'll never see it. And that is by design. The fabrics are hand screen printed. The wallpaper is printed on a great big roll that's engraved. And the substrates, the fabric and the wallpaper come in different widths. And so that really dictates, you know, the repeat that you can get within that width. So although they're slightly off, you'll never see it. It's so slight that if you have the matching wallpaper and fabric on the wall, which is really popular again, that you'll never notice that difference.
That's great. We have one more. Brendan's asking about how do you narrow down your color selections? Do you have a color palette that you're comfortable working in? Is it seasonal? Is it through your travels?
Right, great question. So I always tend to design with blues. I'm a big fan of blue. I'm a big fan of navy, and I think that's probably because I've been inspired by the water, and I think navy blue is a neutral. But with this collection in particular, what we did was start with colorways from the first collection to make sure that we could continue that conversation and tie in the colors. And then we added a few new accent colors. So some of the blues we continued with, and then some of the blues we added in. You'll see a lot of blue in this collection, and then a pop of red, which really brightens up and contrasts with the blues. So the color started off consistently from the last collection, and then we mixed in some things to complement that. And this collection really wanted to be a little bit richer, just by the nature of the designs themselves. You know, this has a little bit of a chinoiserie feel, wants to be, it's still everyday, but it's a little more elegant. So some of the colorways represent that. And bringing in this kind of warm, fiery red with the blues, I think is really, really pretty, and is working with a lot of colors that we're seeing out in the market.
Another good one here. They're asking about your favorite printing method and why you prefer one to the other.
Ah, okay. Well, this is a complicated question. So the answer is it depends. My personal favorite printing method is hand screen printing. And the reason is it really is a craft, and it still exists today in the US. There are craftsmen who take these giant screens, move them down the table, pass a paddle back and forth. It presses the ink into the fibers instead of just sitting on top like digital. And it's just beautiful to see, and it makes a really durable product. But for wallpaper, as much as I like that ink feeling of it sitting on top of the paper, digital printing is amazing. It has come such a long way, and the product that you get with it is almost direct from the artwork. And so it's that direct translation of all of the kind of the imperfections that are so beautiful. So for fabric, I really prefer hand screen printed. For wallpaper, I kind of like digital.
I have one about your travels.
Oh,
sorry. One of the attendees is asking, have you ever been surprised by your inspiration you've gotten from your travels? Is there anything that's popped up that you, I guess, didn't think would have when you're traveling?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm lucky enough that I've lived in New Zealand and I've traveled all over the world. And my way of keeping a journal was doing little sketchbooks. So I've got watercolor sketchbooks and just doodles and sketches and notes. And so it's a great reference tool, but I have been back to them so many times that I was kind of amazed. I thought when I started this process, all right, well, I'll look back through the sketchbooks, but I've used them so many times. But this time, I think with this different collection in mind, and really specifically botanicals, different things popped up for me. So I was noticing the plant shapes and the bird sketches more than landscapes or colors. So yeah, that was actually surprising.
Got a few more good ones here. So Steve is asking, are there any colors that you stay away from? And he's particularly asking about yellows.
Ah, yellow. There are no colors we stay away from during the process. So during the process, once I get a design kind of pulled together and start coloring it, I will color, and Kate, Kate is shaking her head. I will color as many as I can come up with. Just crazy colors, bright colors, high contrast, low contrast. And so I do start, I stick with the color palette that we started with. I do bring in some kind of flyers, maybe things that I'm seeing in the market. Yellow is a tricky color to me. I think yellow, it can go so many different ways. You have to hit the exact yellow. And it wasn't in the collection before. It's not something that we ended up with in this collection. I'm not opposed to it, but it just didn't fit with this collection.
They're coming in now, Victoria.
Okay. Bring them on.
So Janie's asking, is there any place you haven't traveled to yet that you would want to travel for an inspiration for a future collection?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many places. Yeah, I have not been to Indonesia. I have not been to, actually have a friend who lives there, and I would love to go. I have not been to mostly Asia, I would say. I I would love to see, I'd love to see more rainforest. I travel usually to places on the coast, near the water, which I love, and I'm no complaints about that. But I would love to see, there are so many other places that have different landscapes. Yeah, rainforest, I would really like to see.
I've got a good one here. Have you ever thought about putting your designs onto tapes, like decorative tapes for panels or pillows?
Ooh, yeah, trim. So as a former decorator, I love trims. Yes, I would love to put my designs on trims. Um, it is a very different production method, and it's one that I'm not completely familiar with. But yeah, I mean, I could see all kinds of elements from this collection, for instance, done on trim. Yeah, sign me up for trim.
We can help you in that department. um, Barb is asking, are there coordinating wallpaper and fabrics with each pattern, and do all the colors marry up?
So for the most part, in this collection, we do have matching fabric and wallpaper. You will see that there are some colorways that don't appear as either wallpaper or fabric and do appear in the other. And here's why. So when you get into the actual production of these products, particularly with the fabrics, the more colors you have, the more complicated it is. So there's a very specific rotation of colorways that you have to design within. And with the digital wallpaper, it's easy. You can plug any color you want in and you get a beautiful product. It's a little more limiting with the fabrics. When you're dealing with screens, they get printed in a particular order, and you've got to go dark to light. And so every colorway has to follow that same kind of formula. So hopefully that answered the question. But I think generally
to add to that, I know because we came across this kind of unexpectedly where we weren't able to do every wallpaper into a fabric based on the rotation of the colors and how they bled through. So we did have to kind of adjust a little on the fly to make sure we were able to make it look good. I mean, that was the end result there.
Yeah, it's a really technical process to put a collection like this together. It takes several months to go through all of the design refinement. And then when you get into the actual production, there are things that come up in production that can really throw you off. And you've got to, push that creativity and find solutions. So I'm really, really proud of this collection, knowing all of the challenges that we went through and how it comes together. I think we have another question coming in.
Another question. Um, Steve is asking, with botanicals being so prevalent in the collection, are you considering any indoor-outdoor fabrics or performance?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I'd have to bounce that one back to Stout. So this is something that I have designed, but this is actually a Stout collection. This is their in-house collection. So I would be all for that. I know indoor outdoor is really popular.
We'll take a look at that. And then Mariel is asking, what's your thought process early on in regards to how much of future trends to incorporate new designs? Is there a timeline that you need to consider for the life of the product that drives your design decisions?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. That is one of the challenges when you're designing. I try, and I think that it's accomplished, I try to design things that are timeless because I don't want to design for trends. And that way, 6 months from now, we all think we all tie into what the trends are going to be, but no one really knows. And I really prefer that things are timeless, that you can continue to mix them in even as trends change. And I think we've accomplished that in this collection. I think colors play into that more than the actual designs. I think you can update things with colors, and I think you can, hit the trends by recoloring. But in terms of the actual design itself, I try to make sure that they are, to me, timeless.
And this question is more directed just to Victoria. Someone is asking, have you ever had any fashion line or clothing?
I would love a fashion line. I have not had a fashion line. I have designed, I did a licensing agreement for many years for a children's swimwear company, which was a ton of fun because it let me design outside of my brand. And, all the bright colors, all the crazy brights and skeins and monkeys. And so that was really fun.
And someone is asking about your preferred method of your painting. Is it pencil? Is it watercolor? Is it oil? When you start your process?
When I start the process, so my go-to, I think a lot of people who are trained in interior design think by sketching, right? I mean, that's what we do. So if you look at my daily planner, for instance, you will see it's doodled all over. It's a little bit shocking. When I sit down to start a design, I generally start with pen and ink or watercolor. And I like watercolor. It's kind of my go-to. I'm comfortable with it. It flows. You can't completely control the water, and you can mix the color on the paper, which is really fun. It's what I traveled around with because you can get really teeny little watercolor sets that are easy to pack and travel with. So I generally start with watercolor. I do like pen and ink. I am doing oils right now. I am sort of working with a really well-known painter who happens to be local and very kind. And I'm doing that just for me, just to, practice art. But in terms of starting a design, I would say watercolor is my go-to.
Is that because of, I know you mentioned earlier in the presentation, your inspiration with water and the ocean? Is it a fluid way of keeping that kind of in with your designs?
Yeah, definitely. I think the two are very connected. So I grew up in Annapolis, which is a coastal town. I spent my childhood on the water, fishing and crabbing and sailing and swimming, and I raised my children here, and we continue to do the same things. So I'm very influenced by water. And you can, with watercolor, you really can get the essence, that feeling of water and the layers and the flow and some of that unpredictability, I think is what makes it so beautiful. I'm going to pull up another favorite. This is my personal favorite. This is Piedmont, and it is more of a little texture than a print. And it really comes from, the idea here was, if you can see that, it, I started with the idea of the bird's feathers and ended up here with just a really simple representation of maybe, layers of feathers. And I think that it works really well as a small print, as just a texture. And to me, it just makes me feel like I could wrap it around me. Like, it just feels warm and comforting. And it's so simple. So it mixes in really well with the rest of the collection. That's my personal favorite.
A great segue. Megan is asking, what is your feeling on animal motifs or animal prints?
I love a good animal print. I actually believe that like cheetah is a neutral, so definitely big on animal prints. In terms of incorporating animals into designs, we've brought in with this collection the bird, and I think that is really successful. I know some people have really strong feelings about birds. I don't know why people either hate them or love them, but I love incorporating animals into prints. I think it's really, it makes it more interesting. I think it gives it life and character.
I've got one here from Sally. She's asking, do you start with a repeat in mind, or do you start with a design and then get it into proper repeat?
You really have to work back and forth with that. I start with a million sketches and get some jumping off points. And then, for instance, in this collection, Onlooker, we knew was going to be the anchor. So that's kind of the center of the collection. So from that, we needed some bigger scale and some smaller scale. So then I do start taking that into consideration. And then definitely when I get into putting it into the repeat in the computer, that is actually just straight up math. So I have to know what the repeat, at least approximately, is going to be. But in terms of getting to that point, we take, sit down with Kate and John at Stout, and we take all of these rough sketches and kind of start to piece it together. Like, this could be cool at big scale. This would be a great small scale. We need a medium scale. So that's something we still need. So it really is a very back and forth process. But once you hit that computer, you've got to have scale in mind, because then it has to be exact.
I think we have time for one more question. Bart is asking, you mentioned earlier in the presentation that the second collection is tying back into the first collection we did together. Can you quickly kind of touch a little more on that?
Yeah, of course. So we all agreed that it's important to take the last collection as a jumping off point, not so much in design direction, but in colorway, which really is a great bridge to tie the two together. And again, the goal is to design things that are not only approachable and pretty, but timeless. So, that last collection is still available, and it is nice to be able to tie some of those designs in with the new collection. So, even on my mood board, I've got a little piece of one of my favorites from the last collection, mostly for color, but also I think keeping that same language, like that kind of vibe, it's a little bit imperfect. Um, it's definitely American style. It really says, okay, this is the Victoria Larson collection for Stout. And so there's that continuity that we're hoping to get. And I think we achieved it.
Victoria, thank you so much for taking the time today. I do think we're out of time. I just want to remind everybody that the new collection, the first and the second collection will all be found at the Gaspard showroom. I believe they are open for appointment, by appointment. So we thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you so much.
Bye everyone.